So we can go. All right, so if your station has the window that pops up that says file new, file open, you can close that. That doesn't cause any crashes. It's when you open up an actual file and start working on it, that's when the crashes seem to be happening. So under Edit, under Preferences, go to Display. So go to Edit, go to Preferences, and go to Display. And this one box where it says Hardware Acceleration Composition Layers, check that box. Right there. So second box from the bottom. So just check the box, hit OK. And then that should be it. Should be it. If it isn't, we have found a couple other things that we could change that will help performance too. But we want to try kind of like one at a time just to diagnose where it's at. Okay? So, if you've done that, then you can just go and open up your transitions file. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is make a new composition. Every one of our transitions will be in a new composition. So if we have 75 transitions, 75 different comps, okay? So go up to Composition, make a new one. And I'm going to call it Transition 02, and I'll even put an underscore after it and put what I want to do. So this one will be a center scale. So I'm going to just call this cent scale. Okay. So transition underscore 2 underscore center scale. And then for the size, we're going to still work at 1920 by 1080. Cool. For our duration, what should that be set to? 3, right? 300, which would be 3 seconds. That'll give us plenty of time to go back and crop it if we need to. Okay. All right, so now we have our new composition. So now for the scaling one, the center one, we're going to start off the exact same way. We're going to go to Layer, New, and Solid. And you see the hotkey for Layer, New, Solid? Okay, it's Control Y. So I'm just going to not even click on that and just hit Control Y. You pick your base color. Looks good. And it's already the comp size, so we hit OK. All right, so what I want to do is I want to scale this from being super duper flat to super big. All right, so there's our thing. So now we would need to scale it. Now, because we're doing this from the center, it's no big deal. We can go right from the center and just scale it up. Okay. The only thing we need to do, though, is break the restraints, right? So that we're only scaling it in one direction and not 2 directions going to the center. So we hit S to get our hotkey. That pulls scale up. We see the 2 values here. And then how do we unlink those together? The little chain, right? The 2 chain. All right. So we have 2 values here. Which value am I changing? Which one's the height? The second one, okay? And a lot of this is kind of like you've seen it before, but sometimes we get just kind of like confused because it's in a different interface. So we're going to take the second number and just put it to 0. All right? So now by typing in 0 right here, it flattens it. This thing is invisible. We can't see it at all. And then we're going to set our keyframe. So we click on the stopwatch. On my little chart, I have frame 1 is where we're starting, and then frame 18 is where it's going to end up. Again, that's just kind of like a rough number. Depending on what you're doing in there, it may take you longer to do it or shorter. So let's say that we go to frame 18 as our just starting point. You don't have to be exact, okay? I click and drag. I get it to about 18 here. That way I see that it's at frame 18. But realistically, if it's over here anywhere, I set my keyframe. I could always move the keyframe anywhere I need to. It's going too slow, I squeeze it in. Going too fast, I pull it out. Okay? All right, so we go to frame 18. I change this to 100. And there we go. So now I can hit home to rewind it, and then hit play, and we get that. Okay. Now there are some page transitions that are kind of neat in how they do it, where sometimes instead of going the entire screen, they might go like a little bar, and then above it another bar pops open, another bar would pop open, and then you could have those things shrink down too. Okay. So just think about that scaling one. There's a lot of stuff we can do with just the scaling attribute, okay, as far as different ways we can make it pop open. We could have this thing start off at the bottom, let's say, and then it scales upwards, right? That's another way we could do it. Or a little bar pops open here on the bottom, then another one on top, then another one on top. Or they go across the thing this way, or they meet towards the center. Okay, there's a lot of different ways you can use that one scaling attribute to accomplish a bunch of different tasks. All right, so what do we do now after we've set our keyframes? Change the speed of the graph. Okay, so we have to click on scale first, and we have to make these easy ease before we can edit any speed. Just so you see it, if I were to go into my graph editor now, change it to a speed graph, I can't adjust these because they're kind of like locked in. I can adjust them, just not as easy. So I highlight all of them. You can just hit F9. I can't because of my recording software. I'm going to right click, go to Keyframe Assistant, and then go to Easy Ease. Okay. So Easy Ease makes the start of this slow, the end of it slow, and the center of it fast. But what we want to do is we want to play with this so that it goes super quick either at the front or at the end. So we click on the graph right there. We right click and make sure that it's set to a speed graph because that's the easier one for us to edit. You may have to click on the little graphs down here just so you can actually see your stuff. Sometimes they're like super squished. So we click the graph to open the graph editor. We right clicked, made it a speed graph, and then we can just frame it so it fits. Then all we have to do is just click on one of these points and drag it over. And I think I want to go the other way. Okay. The higher it is, the faster it's going to go. So I'm pulling all the height of this to the left. That way it'll go super quick at the beginning and then super slow at the end. Now you do have two bars there. We have a green and a red bar that are kind of on top of each other. So as you drag those handles, you may drag one and it does nothing. That's the other one. So you just keep drag it over, it's fine, and then drag the other one. So just those steps that we've just done, just setting a couple keyframes, changing them to Easy Ease, and editing the graph, for most of you, or for some of you, that's going to be the hardest thing, is just remembering those 3 steps, because literally 95% of the things we're going to do in here are going to have those exact things that we've just done. Okay, when you animate something coming in, going out, moving, you want to have some sort of easy ease. You want to have some sort of speed graph adjustments to it. Okay, so the purpose of the page transitions is to get through a lot of this kind of stuff, a lot of these repetitive processes of setting keyframes, easy easing them, and then adjusting their graph. Now, one of the things I mentioned is you'll see there's a red and a green here. So anytime I click on this, when I move the handlebar, you'll see there's 2 handlebars here. Okay, it's kind of hard to see, but there's 2 of them. One's for the red, one's for the green. We could separate these, but then that creates other issues that it makes it tricky to see our stuff. All right, so let's pull that back a bit. So now we should have something that goes like that, really quick and then slow at the end. Okay. So if we needed to, we can switch the graph off. I'm going to zoom out. I could adjust my time at this point. I could squeeze this into, let's say, 10 frames. And then I would get a faster animation. Now we have to be aware that if I were to put this over 2 or 3 frames, it's going to go so fast I'm not going to see any transition. I'm not going to see any smooth motion. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure I keep that at a good range where I could see the motion That looks pretty good. So I adjusted a little bit. We could always adjust them later. All right, so what's our next step here? We have one that looks perfect. What will we do next? Duplicate them, right? So how do we hit duplicate? Control D. Control D. Okay. And then when we offset each one of these, make sure that we're clicking in the middle of the red bar, not the far left. Remember, we have this indicator here where I have a double arrow. That does not move the layer, doesn't offset it, it just cuts it, it just trims it. So I want to go to the middle of this and scoot it over. So I'm going to go to my second one and scoot it over a couple frames, my third one, scoot it over, my fourth one, scoot it over, and my fifth one and scoot it over. Okay, and obviously I'm doing these from the bottom is starting right away, and then gradually they're moving up. And then I'll go back and change my color. So we hit Control D to duplicate each one of those, scooted them over, and then you can hit Control Shift Y and just change the color. All right, so this is what you should end up with, is something like that, where these scale just like that. Okay, so one scales open, the next one scales open, the next one scales open, and then the next one. Okay, now once we get to a certain point, I think I have two of these too close to the same color. Yep, there we go. There we go. So now once you get the foundation of this, like you may have to do this 10 times, 20 times, 30 times just to sink in all of the steps that we're doing. I mean, even though it's a few of them, but definitely it's worthwhile, because the more comfortable you are with setting keys, making them easy and editing their graph, the easier everything else in the class is going to be, because that's the part that people usually struggle with. Now the other thing that we eventually may want to be able to do is to tweak this. So let's say that we don't like how fast this is going or how slow this is going or any of that. If I were to take this into the graph editor, oops, I have to hit U so I can actually see my keys, then select each one of these, then go to the graph editor. You can see that this can be a bit overwhelming to try to look at. Here's all my graphs basically bunched into one, and if I try to edit this all at the same time, it's going to be really confusing. So sometimes it's going to be easier to delete the top 4 layers and re-edit just that one. Sometimes we can get by with just tweaking the keyframes themselves and not having to do that. Okay? Imagine we had, not that we would have 30 layers, but imagine we had 30 layers doing the exact same thing. We wouldn't want to duplicate and reposition and everything for that. So a quick way that I could get this back, let's say that I didn't want to delete everything. So if I grab all 5 of my layers, what I want to do is move all of my layers that are offset back in alignment with the first one. Okay? So I move my ticker right to the beginning, I grab all my layers, and then I can use the left bracket. The left bracket is the square looking one next to P. Okay? Left bracket moves everything over in alignment with it. So now if I were to hit S to see all the scales, you can see how they're all lined up. So now I could grab these and stretch them out if I need to, or squeeze them in if I need to adjust where they're at. Okay? Then I can just go back, and as simple as that moving part is, I could remove them. So now I have a little bit longer of a time. Okay? Now there's other resources too. Like one of your jobs eventually might be someone wants a family slideshow. Okay? Usually that's like a big thing. Like funerals are even doing that now, where they have like family slideshows at the funeral. So for that kind of thing, you may have hundreds of pictures. You may have 100 pictures in there, and each picture may need to be animated or whatever, and then you need to time out each one of these pictures and then resize it. So there's ways that we could do all of that kind of stuff. So just to show you real quick, one of the things I can do is called sequencing layers. And what I'm going to do is hopefully pick these in the right order. I usually get it backwards. And I'm going to say sequence the layers. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to offset my layers automatically. So instead of me going through and moving it 2 frames over for each one, this one is going to do it for me. So it wants to know how much overlap I have. Right now I have 30 frames per second. I have 3 seconds. So how many frames is in this entire thing? 90. Okay. So if I say I want to overlap 2 frames, then I have 88 frames, or sorry, I want 2 frame offset. 88 frames are overlapped. Okay. So I just hit OK. And you'll see how it automatically offset each one of those. So whether I have 5 or 500, it would offset each one of those 1 unit or 2 things. Okay, so that process goes a little bit quicker when you have these tools at your disposal. There's a lot of times, because I've done plenty of slideshows, where you have to keep tweaking it because the pictures go too fast, or they go too slow, or just not enough of this picture here, and they want to put these pictures up front and these pictures there, and you don't want to have to move all of these things around. Now the nice thing about this too, in this case it really doesn't apply, but you could also do a transition. So I could either dissolve the front layer so it hides the front, so the front basically takes the opacity down, and then we see the back, or I could cross dissolve so it blends between the two. So that's again something you would typically have for a slideshow. You wouldn't want to have to go through and set keyframes for each one of those pictures. Okay, a lot of work. So resources like this are ways you can definitely speed up your workflow. Okay, for now we're only dealing with 5, no big deal. Scoot them over. Okay, and what's nice about this too is we can give it a little bit of custom offset. So even this, I may go like 3 frames here, 2 frames there, and then 1 frame and 1 frame. And that gives you a different look because it allows this first one to be on screen a lot longer. If I bump this up, see how we're losing it, right? So we can really customize what this looks like, maybe in 4 frames, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1, just to see what that looks like. Okay, again, a different feel, a different effect for it. We could even go the other way, 1 frame offset, 2, 3, and 4, just to again kind of tweak what it looks like. All right, so very cool. So there's our center scale one. So now what we want to do is go to the end of this. Okay, where does this thing end? So I'm just literally scrubbing through, let's say 1 second here. Okay, so this is only a 1 second transition. Then I want to hit N. Okay, so just hit N on your keyboard, and then under layer, sorry, comp, say trim comp. On this one, we're going to do the other one, which is going to be a diagonal scale. So we'll call this transition 03 diagonal scale. And we'll leave this at 3 seconds also. All right, so here's the plan for this one. We're going to do one together, and then I'll show you one, just another kind of variation of the same kind of way that we could do this. So we made our new composition. We gave it a name. I did not throw these into my comps folder. I want to throw those in my comps folder, so everything's organized. Okay. And then we're going to start off, again, the exact same way that we started off the other one. We need to make a new, oops, click down here, make a new solid. Again, we could hit Control Y. Again, we pick our base color. I'll go with like a blue this time. It's nice to have variation in your color schemes. If you stick with the same color scheme and you're trying to show off each one of these, it can sometimes become fuzzy because they don't know when one stops and the next one is going to begin. So we make a new comp, we hit OK. Now with this one, it always helps to kind of test things out before you do any animation. I have my thought process there. I want to start off in the corner and go at an angle. So one way that I could do that is, let's say I scale this down like this. There we go. And I'll go to rotate. I'll rotate it. Okay. So let's say like we did the first one. What if I moved it here and then I moved it up there? This is what After Effects is going to do. Look how wobbly my move is. It may not get me a perfect move coming out of there. Okay? I'd really have to be specific to make sure it's aligned perfectly so that when I move it, it actually moves corner to corner. Then I'm going to run into the problem of I want to then put another one next to it. Okay? So what's another way I can get this thing to go from here up to the top and kind of fill this area in? What was that? Right, we can scale it. Okay? Now if I scale it, watch. I'll hit S. It scales it. Okay? So if I were to throw this down here and I scaled it, it would go straight across. So now dealing with one attribute, scale, that allows me to stretch it, but then I can also just move the position wherever I need to, and it won't affect the scaling at all. Okay? Now what I do need to adjust is look at the pivot. The pivot for this is at the center of it, and with it at the center of this, that's going to cause some issues because it's going to scale basically down and up. Okay? Now it's not a huge deal, but we like to be conservative with what we have. Okay? So what I want to do is take this pivot and put it right here. If I put the pivot right there, then I can scale right from that end and basically shrink it up or make it bigger or whatever I need to. So up here at the top, this is your move anchor point. The hotkey is Y, so we use Y. Okay? And then all we have to do is just click and drag right on that. Now to get it lined up perfectly, we hold Control. And you'll see the Control key allows us to snap right to that center point. So you start dragging it, hold Control, and it'll snap it right to that point. Doesn't matter which point you put it on, just one of these points in the center. Okay? So just so I get back to where you guys were, I hit Y, I grab this, hold Control, and just drag it right to the end. Okay? So now our pivot point is right there. Okay? So then I'm going to go back to my arrow tool, which is V. I'm going to go to my scale and rotate, and I'm just going to scale it down, rotate it, and position it.
I'm not getting any.
All right, so if you've noticed on the rotation, there's two numbers here. One says 0x, and then the other one at one point said 0 plus 0. The first one is the amount of revolutions you want. Okay? Revolutions is one time all the way around. So if you wanted this, let's say it's a wheel, you want it to spin 6 times, you don't need to crank it and crank it and crank it to get it to spin 6 times. You can just type in 6, and it'll just go 6 times automatically. Okay? The other number is degrees. So you want this to rotate 45 degrees or 60 degrees or whatever it is, you can just punch that value in. Okay? So for what we're doing, that's not going to matter too much. So I'm putting this kind of like that. Make sure my scale fills the entire thing. Oops. Like that. Okay? That way it's totally full. Doesn't matter if it's lined up perfectly. You could do other things too where it like swipes at different angles. That's kind of a neat one. All right, and then we're just going to set our keyframes on scale. So I'm going to take my scale down to 0. Oops, wrong one. My X scale down to 0. There we go. Set a key. Go up to, let's say, 18 or so. Set another key. Okay, so key at 0. When this is flat and squished, key at 15, I think I set it to, where it's stretched out. So if we scrub in the timeline, it expands. All right, now the neat thing about doing this too is that let's say you missed your target, okay? I didn't miss it because I'm just that good, but let's say that you shot it like this and it didn't hit that corner like you wanted to. Because we're only dealing with scale, we can edit any other property without screwing up scale. So if I go to rotate, I can just click and drag on that number to line that up. Or if I need to reposition it, I could reposition it and rotate, and it doesn't screw any of my other stuff up, which is awesome. Okay? So once you have your first set of keyframes here, the next step is we make them easy ease. And then we go to the graph editor and just tweak the speeds. Okay, so we tweaked those keys, so now we should have it coming out pretty quick. And then you'll know the next steps from here is just literally just to duplicate it and offset it. But the new one is that we'd also move it. So I would just pick that up and move it over. So I duplicate, move it over, offset it, duplicate it, move it over, offset it. Now if you go with something that is a solid color, you know, this could be the end of your transition, right? It could just go bloop like mine did, and I have a blue background. I could put a new animation right on top of it if I need to, all right? Some other things you may want to do just to kind of add some fancy to it is I'm going to go to my center one, which is right there. And I can add different effects to this just to kind of enhance just that single one, or just to enhance other ones or help pull them out or separate them a little bit. So one thing I can do is under my effects, somewhere in this huge list of things is a drop shadow. I think it's under stylize. Nope, way off. Utility, perspective, there it is. So perspective drop shadow, and what this will do is that it'll simulate a drop shadow on top of stuff, okay? So because this layer is underneath everything, I'm not really seeing a drop shadow. Maybe I'll take the opacity up, maybe I'll take the distance up, or the softness, but I'm not really seeing anything. So I'm just going to delete it from there and go to one of my other layers, like let's say that one. When you create one effect, just like Photoshop, that last effect that we used, it stays on top. So I can just go to drop shadow here, and now you can see how I have a nice little line right there where it's actually showing that's on top. So I can play with the opacity, play with the distance, play with the softness, and you'll see now that looks like it's kind of pulled out a little bit more. So then what I can do is just take this effect and I can just click Control C on it and grab everything else and hit Control V, and now everything has that same effect. Okay? And if I don't like the way it turns out, maybe I'll reorder these. Maybe I'll take this one in the center that I want to have more presence and put that on top. Maybe I'll even take the distance up too. And then I can take this one down maybe, and this one up. There we go. That one should be maybe on the bottom. And just kind of reordering these, I can create some pretty neat transitions here.
Moving your layers around.
Right. And just move my layers around just so that the shadow's on top of other things. Okay. Now in some of these too, I may need to move it over. This one really should be giving me a shadow on that side. The same thing here, I should be getting a shadow on this side. Let's really crank that distance up. There we go. So putting it at that angle, I'm getting a nice little shadow right on that side. And if I need to, I'll just delete the shadows from the other ones. Now, every time you use an effect, it opens up the effects control. Okay, so let's say I like this one, I can copy it again, paste it on all of those. There we go, that's much better.
How did you copy and paste that again?
Just Control C right on when we're clicked right on the name, and then we click on the other ones and what was that?
When we're clicked on
drop shadow, yep. And then I just grab the other ones and hit Control V, and it'll copy and paste it. Okay, so that's one way that I could kind of separate these things. Now I may not want to do a drop shadow on these. I'm just going to take the drop shadow off for a second. All right. I may want to use different techniques to kind of pull this out. So let's say I did like an alternating color scheme. So I went to this yellow and this one, that one. Oops, I have to do one at a time. There we go. Okay, so if I have this alternating color scheme or anything where there's different colors, it's harder for me to drop a piece of artwork right on top of it because now I have this pretty big contrast behind it. So I may want to transition it from here into one of those colors. So let's say I want to take it, in this case I'm going to use the yellow in the center. So once we go out, like this, okay, right there is we're out. I'm going to grab this yellow one in the center, which is right here, and I'm going to set some other keyframes. So I want to set a keyframe for my scale, so I'm just going to click on the little diamond. I'm going to click on my stopwatch for rotate, and then I'm going to go up a little bit, and I'm going to scale it out this way, and I'm going to rotate it I guess I'm going to scale it both ways. Maybe not. I'd have to move the pivot. I don't want to move the pivot. So I'm just going to scale it. Okay, that'll work. So now I go here. So it's a good way to transition from one to the other one so that we get that kind of thing happening. Okay. If I want to do the rotate, I could have left my scale manipulator in the center and done some other stuff, but that works too. Okay, and that way I'm getting to a different area. That should be happening a little bit quicker. Okay, and then go into the speed graph and tweak these. So I'm going to highlight this. Come on. There we go. Graph just that. And then pull these in. There we go. Okay. So lots of stuff that we can do with these kinds of things. We could have also left a gap between each one of these and had just like the background of whatever is there behind it. We could have had them coming in this way and coming in that way too. That's not a big deal either. Because of how we have this set up, let's go back to here. Let's say I grabbed all the blue ones, this, this, and this. I go to rotate them, and I'm going to rotate them the other way. And then I'm going to move them up here. A little bit more rotation. There we go. So now again, a different variation of that same technique. Okay? So the point of these page transitions is that you're setting keys, making them easy ease, you're adjusting their speed, and then you're also kind of playing with different ways that we could tell the same story or accomplish the same task. Okay? The goal of this is we want to be able to go from one art piece to another art piece. And it might be something brand new. We may even want to just get rid of all of these, right? So if I wanted to go here to yellow and then empty this out, I could empty that out. I could make the yellow fade into black if I wanted to, doing other methods. Okay, so for, oops, wrong button. So for the rest of class, what I want you to do is just play with these kinds of things. Make different ones. Go online and watch videos of page transitions, different ones, and then try to recreate those. next Wednesday when we come in, a week from today,